Welcome back to Meta'd. This week we're going to be covering some fan favorites with Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past and Legend of Zelda: A Link Between Worlds.
I'm Jimmy, and
I'm Paul.
And if you haven't joined us before, we are the Meta'd podcast, where we do meta-analysis of everything, video games and not video games.
Pretty much everything, then.
That encompasses everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So welcome back again to our Zelda series. We're still going strong. And yeah, let's kick this off.
Right, so a lot of people, around, I guess, my age of mid-20s to kind of early 20s, sort of grew up in the era of when video games were really starting to kick off into the entire generation of Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. And pretty much anyone who had a Super Nintendo had Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. And this is, for me at least, one of the most defining Zelda games of my entire Zelda career.
Yeah, and as for me, my first console that wasn't handheld was a GameCube. So Wind Waker was that for me. And I forgot to mention, we will be spoiling things later in this podcast. So if you haven't played these games, we recommend it. And we'll spoil them for you. So, I mean, either listen to the podcast now and be spoiled and have a fun time, or play the games and then come back and listen to this episode. Either way, we appreciate it.
Yeah, either way works for us. Anyway, so what was great about Link to the Past was it kind of sort of took this moment in the Zelda series, which had only been defined by the Nintendo Entertainment System, and really took it to this whole new level of what Zelda could be and what it was meant to do. And as it kind of went through its iterations throughout its life cycle, the Zelda series as a whole, we began to see way more delving into the 3D aspect of it with Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, really improving on the mechanics of what can be done in a 3D space. And sort of what was left for the 2D Zelda games was kind of just rehashed old mechanics, really gimmicky kind of concepts, and that's what really defined, I think, A Link Between Worlds, was how much it broke away from that entire trope, I suppose.
It actually makes more sense that we're talking about this now after shitting all over Oracle of Ages and Seasons, because those were how a 2D Zelda game should not be, although they were made, and this is 2D Zelda in its best form. From 1991 and 2013. 2013.
So, over 20 years apart.
Wow.
And essentially what was great about both of these games was they were kind of sort of these, defining moments for the entire series. As mentioned, Link to the Past really showed what Zelda could do in terms of its past two iterations. It really defined a lot of sort of what exists in Zelda today. A lot of the world exploration, a lot of the items, a lot of the dungeon aspects.
Full concepts, dual worlds, dark world, light world, characters, how those characters talk and interact with Link, Link's kind of stoicism and backstory is kind of all based around Link to the Past in most new Zelda games.
And so what was really amazing for us, going back to, playing A Link Between Worlds, was how was this going to be different from all the past 2D Zelda games? What was the new gimmicky feature? And what was really amazing about it was that it pulled off something totally original and innovative and didn't feel like just kind of this novel concept that fell off really fast. That's sort of kind of how I feel, with the Oracle games, but also with other Zelda 2D games such as Minish Cap. I felt was very much like that, where there's this entire idea of turning tiny and then doing the tiny part of the dungeon and everything, but it just, in reality, it was just a longer dungeon, and a lot of it wasn't really innovative or made you think critical as much as it was just oh, well, here I have to turn tiny and then go to this room and do the things while I'm tiny, and then bam, we get on with the rest of the game. And that's kind of what the new feature was, and it didn't really feel all that more amazing or really inventive or creative. And so going into the whole entire mechanic of turning completely flat in this two-dimensional space, and being able to like run on walls and like go through nooks and crannies and like get over gaps was something that could really just expand the game in this sort of like almost constricting space of kind of like two dimension.
Well, it worked perfectly, I think, going back to Oracle of Ages and Seasons and Minish Cap, where their new mechanic was restrictive and was like, instead of being a part of the world, it just made it kind of like the puzzle in itself was the new mechanic, whereas the new mechanic in Link Between Worlds, the turning 2D, made the world more open and together instead of restricting parts by seasons or timelines. It was like suddenly the whole world, you can look at the whole world differently, and instead of the puzzles being like brain puzzles, like in Ages and Seasons, where it's like, oh, fill this whole room with red instead of yellow and don't fuck up. It was like, that had nothing to do with the Seasons and Ages concept. That was just like a puzzle in Zelda. Whereas the puzzles, or most puzzles in A Link Between Worlds, had to do with the new mechanic, which was like constantly in the forefront of your mind, where you're like, oh shit, I have this new mechanic from this game that I keep forgetting about. But it's like it's everywhere. It's in every dungeon, and it made everything mesh together. It made it such a complete world.
Yeah, and I think what was amazing about that is it really challenged a lot of players to sort of think critically about how they go about dungeons and puzzles in the game, because you would essentially be like faced with this new puzzle or like this dungeon or something like that, and like instantly it was like, well, how can I use this like new ability to beat the dungeon or like get past this one obstacle? And sometimes, like, you could do it with it, and sometimes you could do it without using the ability at all. But the fact that, like, it made us as players, like, really evaluate the surroundings and think about how we could get over it and how we can beat it.
Yeah, and it was intrinsic to the game, whereas, like, I think we mentioned in our previous podcast, Ages and Seasons, as soon as you're in the dungeon, the external Seasons or Ages powers have nothing to do with the dungeon, which makes, again, the game feel more disparate and separate and just kind of fragmented. And then you're like, oh, a Zelda dungeon, and then, oh, the overworld. Whereas this is like a Zelda game. Everything is this thing that feels good and it looks good.
Yeah. And what was like, so going into having played like extensively in my youth A Link to the Past,
And me playing none.
and then going into this game sort of being like, well, I kind of knew it was based off of A Link to the Past, or like there'd be some elements into it. And then one thing that was really kind of pressing in my mind when like going to it was like, man, I really hope it isn't just this really like big expensive knockoff of A Link to the Past. And
so you had your expectations were already set like really low.
well, I was more, I guess, like, yeah, maybe because
I think that's what it sounds like.
A lot of, I mean, at that time, a lot of 2D Zelda games had sort of just, like, that's kind of what it turned into, was just being like, man, I really hope,
It kind of ruined it for you.
yeah, like, I really hope this 2D Zelda isn't bad or shitty
Well,
anymore.
yeah, and you had already, had your love for Ocarina and Majora's Mask, so you were like, you're like, oh, 3D Zelda, it's the pinnacle of Zelda gameplay.
Oh, God. Yeah, and so going into this,
And the Wii one.
yeah, Skyward Sword was out at that time.
Well, no, the other one.
Yeah, but Twilight Princess.
Princess.
Yeah, that's, yeah. So really going into it, seeing how the game could draw upon its past, I guess, predecessors. And
Past.
Yeah.
You did it.
But really draw upon A Link to the Past, and then not exactly copy it, but have this really heavy referencing that made it more nostalgic.
Oh, yeah. At every step, too. It was the best kind of reference, where it's self-referential because it is in the same series, but also is its own separate thing. So, I mean, to me, that felt great.
It was just like such a relieving game to play, and I think because it could for like older players who had played A Link to the Past, they could draw the parallels and be like, oh my goodness, like this, like here's this one thing in this one dungeon, like oh man, like that little kid who I have to like escort out, like they're gonna turn bad because that's what happened in like the past one. And then like even though you know that's what happens, it still was something totally new and had its own spin on it that like made it unique to itself as well. And I think what's great between it is this, like, even the titles themselves, like A Link Between Worlds, and it's like referencing, you know, Hyrule and Lorule, the two worlds in the game, but it's also this link between
The old game.
the old game.
And we're back. We just took a little dip with the Zoras, you know?
Yep.
A little swim.
Yeah, had to take a little bit to let King Zora.
Yeah, you gotta cool off.
Eep
He's
out
got-
of the way.
Yep, that's what we had to do. But we were talking about the title of the game, the new game.
Yeah, and sort of how it's this self-referential thing between Link to the Past and A Link Between Worlds, because it really does connect the world of the Super Nintendo Legend of Zelda to this 3DS incantation of it. And because it's just so... draws from so many comparisons, and like the game mirrors in a lot of ways, but in a very unique sense that makes it very much its own.
Yeah, it basically copies the dual worlds concept, but it keeps the whole Lorule is a separate entity of the dark world, like from the dark world. It is not dark. It is in the game. There's enemies and darkness, and you literally go through a dark, smoky portal to get there.
Right.
But it's only that way because of, spoilers, the loss of their Triforce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one thing that is such an important thing to mention is this whole entire dual worlds concept, which I'm pretty sure a lot of gamers are pretty familiar with. Like, Metroid 2 did like a whole light world, dark world. Obviously, A Link Between Worlds did. Ocarina of Time had a light world and dark world kind of concept. This whole entire of like, there's this good and bad variation of a world map you get to explore. And I think that's something that really like is this huge defining feature for A Link to the Past that's usually overlooked, is that it's really the first of its kind to sort of introduce that concept and have it be so successful. And like, because prior to that, there wasn't a whole lot of light world, dark world, or anything of that being tossed around, and for it to popularize and just make it such a success was something that was profound for the age.
Well, just take a step back and think about how cool, like, multiple dimensions in a game, like, is. Like, they didn't only popularize that. It's like they created the whole concept of there being like multiple dimensions within a video game, which, regardless of them being kind of similar sideways worlds and stuff, I think a lot of pop culture, not just Zelda games, has like grown off of that spark from A Link to the Past that was like, there's the light world and the dark world, and you can traverse between them as this like multiverse hero, and that's freaking cool. From way like standing back from it, you're like, whoa, Link can like shift between dimensions to like save multiple like realities. That's insane.
And I think sort of this bigger concept too of like all these realities and dimensions being connected to each other, where like we would start getting to see things where it's like, oh, doing something here in the light world, that's going to impact the dark world, and vice versa. And so as a result, it became very much this this purpose to be like, well, I got to save this dark world too, because if I don't, like, then the light world's going to be just, you know, totally messed up,
Right.
or not saved.
It automatically gave you a purpose for this new world that you didn't, like, if you were actually thrown into it, you wouldn't have a connection to it. But it shares so many similarities with the light world where you're automatically tied to it. You're like, I gotta unfuck this shit up.
I know that totally happened in the second dungeon you have in A Link to the Past is exactly that, where you're like, okay, well, here's all this it's like this drowned kind of temple dungeon, and like to get it essentially undrowned, breathing. You had to go to the light world, and essentially it was like the light world equivalent was like it was this reservoir switch thing you had to flip to drain all this water, and then when you went to the dark world, it was like totally drained, and you're able to go in and like start doing the actual dungeon, but just kind of like sort of iterating how there's kind of this connection that happens between like a light and dark world, and how like that sort of impacts the game. And I think really that even though it was very a basic concept that was sort of introduced, like it didn't do such extreme things with it. A lot of games would elaborate on that, and it would really sort of start to play with like, okay, well, how does messing around in one world, impact the other one or the next, and really trying to like play with that idea, which is really kind of like this huge step that happens in making video games. I felt that used that concept.
Yeah, definitely. And even just within like a Zelda game, messing with one thing has far-reaching consequences, because as Link, you mess with the entire dark world and then are able to save both, because you're capable of messing with both things to reach your like ultimate goal to save both, which is like, what? You can do that?
I think it also, what was great about both of these games was, if you think about Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, like in Zelda 2 you could have interact with some villagers and stuff, and like, but they weren't really much for talk or prostitution, whatever that one did. That was like, you can go into her house and get all your hearts back in Zelda 2.
Oh yeah, she wasn't a fairy though. It just was.
Yeah,
she
just
was
some
like a
just like
heart giver.
Come into my house. Let me give you a life. Anyways, in Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, you didn't really have this motivation as Link to go and save, like, everyone else. It was more just kind of the straightforward, like, I'm going to save the princess, and that's, like, what I'm going to do. And then in A Link
Excuse me.
you show up in A Link to the Past, and all of a sudden when you first get to the dark world, you turn into a rabbit, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? And then there's these two other monster-looking things, but they kind of look human. And you're talking to them, and one of them's like, I'm so pissed, I'm just gonna kick the shit out of this little pink ball thing. You talk to the pink ball, and he's like, oh my god, I'm the only reasonable sound one here. And they're like, but dude, this shit totally fucking sucks, man. And you're like, dude, these are normal
kind of people.
Yeah, these are normal people, right? And then you realize later on, like, this item, the Moon Pearl, prevents you from turning into, like, some terrible creature, beautiful bunny, when you go into the dark world. And like, all of a sudden you start like connecting all these dots. You're like, oh dude, it isn't just a bunch of monsters.
They're just people.
Yeah, they're just people.
They don't have orbs.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, dude, now we gotta like save these guys, right? And so now it's beyond just like, oh, well, I'm gonna save Zelda. It's like, no, dude, I'm gonna save this land. I'm gonna save all these people here.
Well, it's kind of funny because you save Zelda. I mean, in like it's like the first quest you get in A Link to the Past.
Well, she gets like re-kidnapped.
I know, but like, if you think about it, it's kind of like, I think they were even self-aware at that point, because in first Zelda, like, the whole thing is you finally save Zelda, and then Link to the Past, you're like, here's Zelda, she's in the castle, and then you just like leave, and then, but then like the rest of the game happens. But it's still kind of funny that you save the princess in the very first mission in A Link to the Past, and that's. Even it was self-referential back in fucking 1991. That's really funny to me.
But it is like, just, I think, kind of like really expanding upon like, it isn't, every game isn't always about like, oh, just go save the princess in the faraway castle. Like, really making about something more just beyond like the two main characters, right? Like incorporating this whole entire concept of like, oh man, there's all these people here that I have to help. And I mean, I also think it sort of started this kind of timeline and storyline for Zelda, which I mean becomes totally like really convoluted, and then we kind of get an answer.
Timeline theory.
Yeah, but I think the important thing was it really tried introducing this sort of grounded story for Zelda that existed, which was like you as Link have to go and like save Zelda, and that's like all really important stuff and everything, but really introducing all these other storytelling aspects of it, and like really trying to draw upon things kind of like the Sacred Realm was introduced in A Link to the Past. But, that's, like, where the Triforce is housed and everything of the sort. But, in A Link to the Past, like, in the early just, like, English translation, it just got turned into the Golden Land is what it's referred to. But in, like, the original Japanese text of it all, it was the Sacred Realm is what it translated into. And so really kind of seeing that, what's developed on and on throughout the games as they progressed was really sort of all started here in A Link to the Past.
Yeah. And continued on to Link Between Worlds, because it's so many things are mirrored in that.
Mm-hmm. And I sort of like the little difference they do between A Link Between Worlds and A Link to the Past, where like Dark World or Lorule isn't just like the Sacred Realm essentially in A Link Between Worlds, but it's this separate entity of like Hyrule that exists, and the Sacred Realm is still where like the Triforce is housed, but that's not what Lorule is. It's not the Sacred Realm.
Right. Which is why Hilda
Hilda
and like Ravio aren't evil. They're just like negatives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like Hilda wasn't evil to begin with because they all had the Triforce, and Ravio isn't courageous like Link. He's just a
coward.
He's just a coward with a bunny mask.
A businessman.
He's a very savvy businessman.
Yeah.
He swindles you out a lot of rupees.
But I think that's kind of a good point to bring up, is sort of like those parallels that are drawn where like you have Zelda, who's like the sacrificing princess who would like sacrifice for her people, and here's like Hilda, who would like be
also
like selfish for her people.
Well, she was trying to be. Oh, that is true. Yeah, she wasn't being sacrificial. She was selfishly trying to, instead of like Zelda would probably come up with some elaborate thing to get the Triforce back. She's like, just take the other one.
Yeah,
it's already there. It won't fuck anything up.
Yeah, no, it translates over.
Yeah,
Our
whereas
Triforce
Ravio is like, I don't think that's the best idea, and then he comes and helps you out.
Yeah. Because maybe like he just didn't have the courage.
Well, yeah, but he still had the courage enough, which is why you're like, that's why he's still my negative man. Because like he has the courage to like basically go against Hilda's orders and help you out, and like ultimately is like the reason. I mean, despite charging you for life-saving weaponry, like he's the reason you are able to like progress in your world.
It's like, yeah, like I have this great plan to be able to save your world and mine, but it's gonna cost you.
I also need to build some things, so I'm gonna need a Kickstarter.
And
Ravio's just like a 2006 Kickstarter.
he's just a millennial who's like, I have this great business startup,
but I'm gonna need $20,000
to make potato salad. Like,
hey, I only asked for $500.
Yeah. Oh my god. But yeah, I really like sort of that distinction of like, Lorule and Dark World not being like the exact same, I guess. But let me tell you, man, like going into like one of the most memorable things, I think, if someone was to ask like any kid who's played A Link to the Past, being like, hey, what's the best song in A Link to the Past?
Oh, it's the Dark World
Overworld
theme?
Yeah, it's just the Dark World Overworld theme every single time.
And this is when it goes. But it'll play.
Well, like, I think it's also that great thing where you just like, you wake up in this new world, right? Like the Dark World and A Link to the Past, and like the first impression you get is like that song, and you're like, oh. And so like the grand introduction it does in A Link Between Worlds, where you're just like, oh man, are they gonna play? Because that was like half my inspiration for playing the game too. Was just like, dude, I want to hear. Yeah, it's like
how are they gonna compare their Dark World to the Link to the Past Dark World?
Yeah.
And then you hear it and you're like,
yeah, it's just Craig-gasm.
With like the new soundtrack with the new
cinematic
orchestral intro. Oh, it feels good.
And that's really something that defines the games for me. I feel it's just like both of their soundtracks are just completely immersive and like amazing, but they're also, as we've been saying, like so referential of each other.
Oh yeah. Well, it's like every Zelda soundtrack has been good because they all are just like, let's use the same overworld theme from Link to the Past, and then riff off of that, and you're like, it works. You don't even have to think about it.
I buy into that.
Yeah, it's like, this is a Zelda game. It's like it's been in Link's Awakening, and it's been in the Ages of Seasons. It was in Majora's Mask. It is like the theme. Mm-hmm. Like when people think of like the Zelda theme, like they don't really think about like. Wait, that's Mario Galaxy. Well, you get the idea. It's like you don't think of the title screen of Ocarina of Time.
Anyways,
yeah. It's like you don't when you think of like Zelda.
Mm-hmm.
You think of like the overworld from Link to the Past.
Right. And I think also another thing that I absolutely love about both of them, but A Link Between Worlds was that in the end of A Link to the Past, they sort of end on this note of being like, and the Master Sword was put away like forever, essentially. Like when it really kind of set in stone.
Yeah, forever means forever.
Yeah, like no pun intended. Really set in stone this idea of like this was the last time we promise the Master Sword was ever used, and then like obviously A Link Between Worlds was this like sequel to that story and that like that universe essentially where like you're like wait a minute. Am I gonna get the Master Sword again? Because we said
you guys
last
said
time,
forever,
but I feel like they addressed that right away, where they're just like, yeah, that story happened a long time ago, and like so you're kind of like, okay, there's been some time like since like A Link to the Past happened, like it was a past hero, like totally new slate we got going on here, and so like getting the Master Sword, it didn't really feel like they needed to retcon anything, like they didn't do like that one
right. It was more like Sahasrara just being like, when I said forever, I kind of just meant like not like a really long time, like 20 years
soon. Yeah, and so really just like the way that the game sort of addressed a lot of the kind of the loose ends, or I guess like closed tied ends of A Link to the Past, and really just kind of continued on with the story and didn't focus on that like the really nitpicky
it was elegantly
detail.
done.
Yes,
for sure.
Yeah, and it didn't have to, like I said, retcon anything really. Like it just went with it. And
yeah,
so,
it was all self-referential anyways. It didn't have to be like, oh, they didn't have to explicitly be like, this character is the same character. It's just like, this is a witch character. You get it. And then you're like, I do! And you don't have to question it. It's just everything works. Mm-hmm. The names of the people are the same. The concepts are the same. The items are the same. So you're like, you're already immersed in the world. You don't have to be taken out of it by like thinking back to A Link to the Past and be like, hey, wait a second. I already did this before and now I'm angry about something that I shouldn't be angry about.
And I really think like, as like you just said with like the world being immersive off the bat, like it was really it was really evident that the developers like kind of put their heart into this, like when they mapped it out and they designed it and everything. And I feel it was like so important at the time because I felt that like Nintendo itself was kind of in sort of this little like in kind of a tight spot, right? Like, the past Zelda title, Skyward Sword, like Skyman, wasn't even like too popular. Like it was popular.
It was popular. Everybody bought it because it was a Zelda game.
Yeah,
but it's like universally, well, not universally, but it's very contentious. There's a lot of people who like it and are like, it's beautiful. The 1-to-1 sword combat is great somehow. I don't know. And then there's other people that are like, bomb bowling. Fi is the most annoying character since Navi. Blah blah blah. So it's like, it really created a divide between the like Zelda fandom that I think A Link Between Worlds. Oh, it linked back the fandoms because it went back to an old formula. Wow. I think they had good writers. I think they, instead of having an annoying person following you around in Skyward Sword, they wrote full characters and Link's emotions and stuff. Like when he wakes up and he's in like normal clothes and he gets all of his items and stuff, and you automatically build his character and you're into it. Whereas in like Skyward Sword, you like get a cat and do chores and get the mail and stuff. Where it's like, it doesn't really feel well written to me.
Yeah. No, and like also like it kind of did like one of the things that I personally am just not a fan of is like creating like sort of this hub world, and that's like what Skyworld was. Like it was this hub to access the rest of the world, and so like you couldn't just walk like from one point in the world to the other end of the world, like to the rest of the map. Like you had to go back to Skyworld to access this new area, and that was just something that like for me like it just really ruins the immersion of it, and I'm just like, it's this extra tedious step, you know? And it seems just kind of lazy as well from a design point. Like, it just seems like developers trying to cut corners to, like, not have to really think out, like, how the world needs to be laid out. Like, they can just be like, oh, well, how do we get from the desert to the lake? You just go back to the Cloud City.
And then you go there from there.
Yeah, right. And it just didn't seem like all that, like, compelling. And so for Link Between Worlds to like really just throw the players into the entire world, and I think like they really wanted players to just like really get into it. That's why you could like rent all the items at the start of the game and like go into dungeons being like, I have all the
like,
fucking items.
I got 9,000 rupees, so I bought everything.
Yeah, and it's like
let's fucking do this.
And it really made you explore all the nooks and crannies because you're like, dude, I want to get more rupees to get more items, and then like. Yeah. You get all these items, and it's like you're not even in Dungeon 1 yet, and you're just like, let's fucking go. And you really just like, because then you got other items, you're like, I can explore more of the world. And then there was also the like little squid mama thing that's like, find my babies. Yeah. And like, so you're like, oh, dude, I want to find these babies, because then it makes the items even cooler and stuff. And so you go out, and you're like, okay, I know there's so many in this area. And so you obviously explore every nook and cranny and like really get into it where you're just like, I just need to find everything.
And it worked really well with the checkpoint system, where that existed with the like Flute and the Bird and Link to the Past. It was like you could save here and warp to these. So again, the house where you buy items is not the hub world, because you don't ever have to return there if you buy all the items. It's basically just like a shop. And so making the checkpoints, again, breaks the world up into like a huge place, because you start the game and you're not in the hub world. You're just like, what am I doing in the mountains? Yeah. And then you like check your map, and there's like 3 of the little shell guys there, and you're like, sweet. And you like automatically have something to do, even if you like don't remember what you were doing before. And that felt fucking great.
Yeah.
Because this was a game I put down a lot, because I'd play it for like an hour and a half an hour, and I'd be like, fuck yeah, I love this game, and then I'd like put it down, and then I'd pick it back up. But it was like a very fulfilling feeling to just get back into it.
Yeah, and that's also like one of the things too that it captured really well was this whole entire want and desire to explore the world. And a lot of games I feel have a hard time capturing this notion where like you go and you're like, all right, well, I'm gonna go and fight this enemy, or I'm gonna go to this part of the world map, and like I have to grind out or find this one item because I need it if I want to like make my guy the strongest or whatever, right? Like, and that's the compelling thing, and you're just like, it just feels really grindy, or I feel like I just have to put in a lot of work to get this thing. Or to get the best item or whatever. And
but it wasn't a grind.
No.
It was just explore. It was like, you just had to explore.
Yeah, like that was the thing, was like I was more excited to explore this world map than like any other Zelda game, I think. Like I just wanted to find everything because like I had all the tools like right away where I'm just like, cool. And there was also this thing where like you rented the items at first before you could buy them, so you couldn't like, if you died, like you would lose them. Away, yeah, so you're just like, well, cool. Well, it also offered this other incentive where I'm like, well,
like
I
a
don't
challenge.
Want,
like, oh yeah, I can't take the bow now. If I die, I have to pay 200, 500 more rupees.
Yeah, but then you're also like, well, I'm gonna go get everything and go check out the world, but I can't just be careless. Like I have to make sure I don't die in the process. So it's like there's also this extra incentive to like not be reckless and really just sort of like absorb in and like be methodical and think about your surroundings. How am I going to use the mechanic? How am I going to use these items? Like, where the fuck is this squid thingy?
Yeah, I I got kind of bored with the squid thing. It felt tedious to me at the like. I really loved it, and I found like 100 of them or something. Like there's so many, and then like it would get down to like there's still one in this area, and I was like, I don't want to go back there. It's like I've been there like 60 times now. I don't know where the fuck it is. So I don't know. That part to me, it felt a little contrived, but it was like it was still fun. It was just like I personally was like I've played this game for 60 hours. I should probably move on.
Yeah.
I think Majora's Mask 3DS came out, and then I was like, oh well, fuck this game.
But I think that's really what the game did was it demonstrated this potential that 2D Zelda games could still be really fun and challenging because I think they had kind of fallen off, and as we mentioned earlier, a lot of the focus had gone to the like 3D Zelda games. Like they were getting way more, I mean, like budget and like technology. Like the platforms they played on were just more advanced than like handheld technology at the time. And so as a result, like it really took off, and 2D Zelda games kind of suffered. But like this game was just like had a lot of the heart and soul of the developers put into it, and like they got really creative with it, and it showed, and it was extremely fun.
Which I think was immediately present in Link's Awakening, because it was like it's still like how we mentioned, it still felt like a Zelda game, and it had a really interesting story, and exploring was fun in Link's Awakening. And that was not much later after, Link to the Past. And since it was on a handheld console, it had less buttons, so they had to figure out how to like dumb down the Zelda game.
Right.
Or, the Zelda franchise for mobile or handheld devices. And it was like, it was a valiant effort. Link's Awakening, we think is better than Ages and Seasons. And despite it having 2 input buttons and a D-pad, it was like...
And I really think that was like, like Link's Awakening, and I think when I talk about like the developers like really putting their heart and soul into A Link Between Worlds, I feel like that's the same drive they had when they made both like Link's Awakening and A Link to the Past. Was like they were presented with this opportunity to be like, we can innovate. We can do something really amazing right now. Like we have like the technology and the capability of doing so, and like they just really put like all of their heart into it, and it created this like masterpiece essentially. Yeah,
that they knew was a masterpiece. So over 20 years later, they're like, you know what? We should probably return to this and see what else we can do with it. Mm-hmm. And I think that would be a funny like story. They're like somebody's playing Link to the Past in Zelda or Nintendo headquarters, and they're like, wait, this game's old. Can we like do this again?
Yeah. And like it's just so obvious to kind of see like the drive that was in both of those games and how that translated over so smoothly and beautifully. And really like, at the time, A Link to the Past showed the capabilities of the Super Nintendo, and A Link Between Worlds like demonstrated
selling points.
Yeah.
It's like, look at what the SNES can do, look at what the 3DS can do, and you're like, wow. Like A Link Between Worlds has amazing graphics, an amazing soundtrack, and just all of these bits work together to make the like cohesive game. And it was the same for A Link to the Past. You're like, wow, Mode 7 map, it looks awesome. It doesn't look weird like all those other, I don't know, it kind of, in Chrono Trigger, it still looks weird to me.
Yeah, but it's like the world was so also like interactive.
Yeah.
Like,
well, yeah, because the Mode 7 kind of made it look 3D, and you'd be like, I'm going to go to that mountain. And then like you would, and it'd be like, it would feel, oh, that was... Because they did the parallax when you're on the top of the mountains, and there's the cloud layer, and then there's like the bottom layer, and you're like, how the fuck how high am I right now?
So high, man.
Dude, I'm 420 blazing it right now. But yeah, like that sense of scale, I think, is what I wanted. And they had that in A Link Between Worlds, because sense of scale in Wind Waker, huge ocean, feels big, takes a long time to get across. Sense of Scale and Ocarina of Time, huge fields, right Epona. Majora's Mask is same, Goron, whatever. But like I feel like it was hard to get a sense of scale in a 2D game, and they did it so perfectly in A Link to the Past, and then they were like, oh, well, we did it perfectly before. Well, let's just fucking do it with 3D graphics this time. And it looks amazing in 3D. Link Between Worlds has a really good 3D function.
Mm-hmm. And I think really, like, also the artistic bit, too, of, like, A Link Between Worlds, it's just, like, it's just so fucking beautiful to look at, man. Like...
It's all bright, too.
Yeah.
It's all so bright.
Like a painting. Like, that's kind of what inspired the, like...
Oh, man. The developers are Yuga. Make everyone a painting. Well, that's another cool thing, is the style of the paintings is kind of... I don't know. It's like reminiscent of the Wind Waker style, I guess. I don't know.
Kind of like cel shaded.
Yeah. Like it's obviously like a painted style, and they're low poly and whatever. But it looks really cool, and it reminds me of the Master Sword room in Wind Waker. With the
like stained glass.
Stained glass. Like that's what it reminds me of, and that's cool in itself. That I mean, it's probably not completely referencing that, but it is like obviously the artists took time and care to like make these games look really fucking nice.
Yeah.
And the soundtrack is amazing, and
there's really like, I mean, we could go on and on, like just praising like what these two games did, and sort of like how also like they played together, because it's like beforehand I would always just play a Link to the Past by itself, but now like I don't think I can play A Link to the Past anymore without having also to play A Link Between Worlds. And it sort of became this like single entity of a game where like, yes, they both can be played individually, but like in reality I feel like I'm missing out, or like I'm cheating myself of an experience if I don't play them both at the same time.
That sounds hard.
Yeah, but it's like...
Would you be like holding one controller and then...
No, like, without playing them back to back.
I gotcha.
But it's just, yeah, like that's sort of what the game has become for me, was like it became so beautifully told together that like I needed to play both to get it.
And that's a fitting end to A Link Between Past Worlds. The Legend of Zelda.
Yeah, we've really been pushing this meshing two worlds together with that and Oracles.
Yeah, I mean, with those, bringing it back to Oracle of Ages and Seasons, those worlds being so not linked, despite having linked games and passwords, trying to fit them together into this cohesive game experience, we achieve two games 20 years apart that feel like a bigger story together.
And really, I don't know. I feel that's what Zelda's always been really good at. Like in terms of when I think about the nostalgic value of it, is I'm just like this giant woven tapestry.
Yeah. Just like it feels like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are intrinsically linked. I mean, that they're good at it, man, and that's a good feeling.
Yeah, and I think this is something we'll also be able to pick up later as well too. And so, stay tuned for any new updates we have in the next couple of weeks. We should definitely have a couple more episodes out as well to further elaborate this and finally come to a close in our Zelda series.
Yeah, so keep hitting us up on @MetaPodcast on Twitter. Or when I say keep, I mean start to, because you guys are really not dropping any criticism on us, and we really appreciate it.
So we're just gonna keep releasing the production just as it is until you guys tell us it's fucking bad.
Yeah, because apparently it's perfect. And no, it's not perfect, but it's pretty damn close.
God damn it.
No, but yeah, thanks for listening to this episode of Meted. You have been Meted, and we'll continue the Zelda series next week, maybe? I mean, this is the second podcast in a week. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, next week.
So we'll see.
Yeah, stay tuned.
Bye.
Bye.